this episode of Grief in Common, we talk about cancer, respite care, and death throughout.
Welcome back to the Grief in Common podcast by the Winston Swish youth team. I am Rosie and I am 21 and I am joined today with Grace. Do you want to give a bit of an intro?
Hiya. Yeah, I'm Grace. I'm 22. Currently live up north with my mum. And my dad died when I was 8 years old of pancreatic cancer. I was 8, so it'd be coming up to 14 years ago for me. It happened really quickly. For those that don't know, pancreatic cancer is like one of the top deadliest cancers. My dad was diagnosed after a year of illness, not sure what it was, passed to and from doctors. And then, he was diagnosed, and then 2 weeks later he died at home, surrounded by all my family, but I was asleep in bed. I didn't get to say goodbye in that sense, but I remember the night before he died so clearly in my head. We had a few people around for dinner, and my dad sat at the head of the table, and we had chili, and I think that's why I don't like chili now, because and he had dinner, and then I just remember saying, "Night, Daddy, I love you," and then I went to sleep, and then the next day he'd gone. So I remember waking up. I just knew it straight away. I felt it in my soul. It's so weird for as an 8-year-old to have a feeling like that, but I woke up and I can even now still feel the carpet between my toes and the anticipation of walking to my mum and dad's bedroom, knowing that it's just going to be my mum in there. And then I think being so young, I just wanted to I wanted to go to school because I thought he was going to be there when I got home, because I didn't quite understand. So
My dad died too, also of pancreatic cancer, 2.5 years ago. So I was 18. I think that's something that I'll never quite understand, because until I was 18, I had never experienced another death of someone that I was very close to. Me and my dad, we were best friends. And unlike Grace's story, my dad was ill for a while, I think about 2 years. So my dad was taken to the hospital on my 16th birthday. That was a few days after we had been to the Killers concert in Belfast, and it was our first concert as a family. And when we got there, there was a lady standing behind us, and she said to my mum, "I'm not sure your husband looks quite right." And my mum was like, "What do you mean?" And she was like, is he a bit yellow, or is he okay? Maybe the beer's done something funny to him." And my mum said, "Oh, I never realised that my dad, he didn't take it as much, and he just walked to the back of the stadium with my brother, who doesn't really like big crowds anyway, so that was convenient for him." And then after that, he was taken to the doctors, and they said, "You're going to need to go to the hospital and get some tests, there's something not right here." And first they thought it was kidney stones or something along those lines. And on the 1st of December, they said, "Your husband has pancreatic cancer," to my mum. And then she told us, and we were all a bit shocked, because he wasn't a very sickly person. He was in the Navy for 22 years. He was quite fit, and he was young as well. At that point, he must have been about 43, give or take a few years. I can't quite remember. But and then in January, he was lucky enough to qualify for a procedure, which is a 7-hour-long surgery called the Whipple's procedure, where they take out quite a lot of body parts. Don't ask me what, I'm not sure what they are. But anyway, it looked good for him. He had a few months of oral chemotherapy where he didn't look fabulous, but, he was on the mend. He went back to work, and the doctors were saying, "Wow, we've never seen anyone go straight back to work after a procedure this long." And then after being in remission for a while, he went for a routine check on a random Monday when I was doing my AS levels, so my first year of A levels. And my mum came home And she didn't tell anyone for a while. And then after I finished my exams, her and my dad sat me and my brother and my sister down at the table, and they said, we don't know how to tell you this, but your dad's cancer's come back and it's not good. It's not a good prognosis. And then shortly after that, it was diagnosed terminal. And then after about a year, it got a lot worse. I moved to uni in London. And then come the October, my mum said, I think you should think about coming home just to see him. And I said, okay. And she said, he's going into the hospice for, what's the word? Respite, yeah. And pain management. And so I flew home on probably the Monday. I had a flight booked back for the Thursday. And when I got there, I realised I was in complete denial and there was no way I was getting on that flight on Thursday. And then he died in the hospice on the following Monday. So he'd been in the hospice for a week and he just died. I wouldn't say peacefully, but he just died there with my mum on one side and me on the other. And like Grace not being able to eat chili, I can't watch Gogglebox. It makes me cry because when I was in the hospice with him, where I stayed there for the whole 7 days, or the whole 6 days that I was there, because it was COVID and they weren't allowing people in and out. So I stayed, and my mum had noise cancelling headphones in silver, and I remember wearing them probably 12 hours a day and watching Gogglebox or listening to music, and I can't watch Gogglebox anymore. It just makes me a bit emotional. But yeah, that's a bit about how I lost my dad.
That's mad that our dads both died of the same thing and we didn't know.
I did have this conversation the other day with someone though. When, or at least in my experience, when someone's talking about death or like one of their loved ones passed, my first question is never going to be, oh, well, how did they die? It's just a bit insensitive. So maybe that's why it's never come up.
Yeah, it's quite, even though it's the same thing, there's still those differences there, isn't there?
Yeah.
My dad was terminal straight away, so a bit like your dad, like they thought it was something else. They didn't know, they thought he just had back pain, or they thought it was just like a kidney infection, and then he got passed from pillar to post of doctors and blood tests, and then he wasn't eating, he wasn't really sleeping, he lost loads of weight, he went jaundice as well, so he went yellow. And then they were just like, yeah, it's terminal and it's in your pancreas and your liver and everywhere. So I think like you, I was in denial because I didn't know what was going on. I was at primary school and I remember saying to one of my friends, like, my daddy's going to die, but I didn't know what that meant. And it was, my mum would be like, why are you saying that? And I was like, because it's going to happen, but I didn't know what dying meant, or that it meant he was never going to be here again. And the few weeks before my dad died and the few weeks after, and I don't know about you, but for me, the weeks after are just black. I remember the day he died, and then I was off school, I think, for about 2 weeks, and I just don't remember any of it.
When my dad died in the hospice, I was at uni, but because of COVID, uni was all online. So after my dad died, I was still attending my lectures online and I was still doing group work online. And I don't actually remember much of it apart from the fact I was doing it because it was my first year. And, I knew he was sick when I moved to London, and he said, you can't let me stop you. You've got to go anyway. So I did. I did go, and I'm really glad I did because it's, stronger character building than anything else. But I did a few lectures, I did some group work, and then it was nearly Christmas and I thought I can't do this any longer. This is not sustainable. I had crazy insomnia. I probably didn't sleep for 3 or 4 days, and then I would sleep for an hour and then the same repeat. And from being in the hospice, I also had really bad noise sensitivity. Like the smallest things would annoy me or upset me or set me off on one. I think that's really hard because, I mean, everyone grieves in their own way, so you have absolutely no idea how to prepare for it, especially like yours, Grace, if the death is unexpected. I knew my dad's death was coming at some point. I was in denial when I went to the hospice because it had been 2 years of your dad's sick, or your dad has cancer, and we knew all those things. I just never thought it would happen to my dad. I think that's probably one of the hardest things that I had to get my head around. Like, it doesn't matter how good a person you are or how tight your family bond is, like, something can still happen. So for ages, I just thought, well, why my dad? Why me? Why is this happening to me? And also, I had a very strong support network, but not a support network where people had been through the same thing. I mean, no one in my year at school, as far as I'm aware, had ever lost a parent or anything similar. So it was difficult, but it taught me a lot, definitely. Like, I've had grief since, and I think it's helped. But my dad, like, I always tell myself, and my mum reminds me often, the hardest thing I'll ever have to go through in my life has already happened.
Yeah.
And it happened young.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was the only one in my year. No one, they say, don't they, that no one knows what it's like until they have to go through it. And, I had girls in my class saying to me, why aren't you over it yet? Like, it's been 6 months, or, it's 14 years down the line for me and I'm still not over it, and I'll never be over it. I think it's just one of those things that you carry with you, isn't it? Grief it's become part of me now. And
I agree with you, Grace. I don't think I ever will be over it. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to be over it, because as long as I'm thinking about my grief, I'm thinking about my dad.
Yeah.
And I never want it to get to a day where a day goes past and I don't think about him, because I'll feel guilty.
Yeah.
But I think it's our job to keep, their spirits alive.
I don't know if you saw, but I think it was Andrew Garfield talking about how grief is just like an extension of love, and how what's left is all the love that you have for that person. And I think you're so right. Like, talking about my dad is really important to me. I kind of have this thing where I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable, because it's not about you. And I like talking about him, and I have all these pictures on my wall of like memories of holidays, and you can see the gaps in, like, from where he was poorly, where there's not photos of me with him. And I just think, like, that's why I always take photos. Everyone's like, Grace, you take too many photos. And I'm like, no, I want to remember it all. I want to see it all.
I completely agree with you, Grace. I love taking pictures. I'm also the friend that videos everything, the family member that takes all the pictures, puts them in the group chat. I mean, if I didn't have all those pictures of my dad, I would be worried that I would forget what he looks like. And I know it sounds crazy and it might sound a little bit silly, but when you're not seeing the person every day or every week, I just feel like I'd be terrified that one day I won't be able to remember their face.
I think it's so important that conversations like this are helping break down that barrier and break down that taboo of, oh, you can't speak about death. It happens to all of us every day, all the time. We're all going to die. Why it's not talked about more, I don't know. But I was very blessed that my mum she's been a communicator all my life. So she was very talkative, and like, we talked about dad, and she got me to Winston's Wish for counselling. And that's meant that, we're able to open up to each other, and we can talk about my dad, and we can think about, times with him, and, talk about the hard stuff as well. Because my dad, I've got 3 half brothers, and, he was a very different dad to them than he was to me. He was quite strict, whereas I was the little girl, I was a princess, I was the youngest, got it easy by the sounds of it. So, we talk about, you know, what he used to be like. And if my mum hadn't have been as strong, then I'd be in a very different situation, because she was really good and, you know, kept us together. And Winston's Wish did that as well. You know, we had face-to-face counselling. We went to the weekends away. I've been to online groups since, and I think that support network is so key to talking and being open. And like you say, the worst thing has already happened to us. I feel like I could conquer the world now. Nothing, you know, you can throw it all at me and I'll be all right. My nan died 2 years after my dad of the same pancreatic cancer. And I think if anything, that hit me even worse, because I knew what was coming and I knew that, you know, this isn't good. And she had it diagnosed and she had a year, and it was like, okay, I know where this is going to end up now. But I think it's taught me a lot about myself and a lot about what I can handle and what I can deal with.
Definitely same. I think I'm glad that you had a strong bond with your mum, because I did too, and I definitely wouldn't be where I am now without her. I mean, since my dad died, she's pretty much made it her work to educate people and talk to people about grief, and, you know, in her case, losing a husband that she'd been with since they were 13, so about 30 years, yeah. And talking to children who have experienced grief, because one of the most important things I learned when I was going through it was that she needed to communicate with us. If you didn't tell us what was going on, then we felt shut out. And at the end of the day, that's our dad, so we wanted to know. And also, I think it depends on the person, it depends on the child, but if they don't have the full picture, they'll fill in the gaps themselves. Like, my brother is an avid reader and a researcher, and so he would look it up, and if you didn't tell him exactly what was going on, I'm sure he would draw his own conclusions, and that's not always the best case scenario. Grace, do you have a favourite memory of your dad that you want to share?
Yeah. My dad was a stay-at-home dad, so my mum was the one that went off to work, and my dad looked after me and stuff. And every Saturday morning, he used to get me up and we'd walk the shop, and he'd get me a pack of jelly tots as he bought the paper. Because it's weird, I can still, if I close my eyes, I can still feel how my hand felt in his hand when we'd hold hands walking to the shop. It's like that phantom touch. It's really weird, but I hold on to it very dearly. And his friend owned the shop, so we'd stand there and talk to his friend, but I wouldn't be allowed to eat my jelly tots until I got home. So I'd be staring at this pack of jelly tots, can we please go home? Stop gabbing. And then we'd walk home and he'd make us a full English breakfast nearly every Saturday morning. But yeah, what about you? Have you got any special ones?
First of all, I just love it that your pick was jelly tots. I love jelly tots.
Oh yeah.
As the years go by, I'll be able to pick one memory and go, oh yeah, that one, that's definitely the one that I'll tell people, but it changes all the time. Right now, the one that's at the front of my head is my dad was always away. He was in the Navy, so he used to go away on deployment quite often. And I remember there was one weekend, and actually it was my mum that was away and my dad was taking care of us. And I'd been going to ballet since I was 2. And this weekend, I must have been 5 or 6, I had a ballet exam. And if you've ever had to do ballet as a child, not had to, at that point it was a obligation, but I did eventually stay. If you've ever had to do ballet as a child, you'll know how rigorous the exams are. You know, you get your hair scraped back into a bun. You can feel the bristles on your head. You want to cry because it hurts so much. And then they spray so much hairspray. I can smell it right now, but little pink ballet tights and a little chiffon wraparound ballet skirt and a little leotard. The ballet hall was a 15-minute walk from the house. And he thought, yeah, we'll walk there. That'll be an excellent idea. We'll walk there and then I'll do her hair when we get there. And so I am just skipping along the pavement, hand in hand, and I trip and I fall. And down the hill, and I've grazed my knees. I've ripped my baby pink tights. They're now covered in blood and gravel. We had to stop at a house of a friend of my mum's who cleaned up my tights and put plasters on my knees. And then I continued walking with my dad to the ballet hall, and he did my hair badly, but it stayed in. I did my little dance exam, and I came back out and he had a Freddo for me. So I was over the moon. But yeah, that's what I remember. I remember him panicking because it was his one job, and I tripped and grazed my knee, and my perfect little pink tights were ruined. But it's a memory. I have audio messages from my dad, text messages, photos, stupid videos that I took at the time that I thought, I'm never going to look at these again. Or this is like so ridiculous. And in some of them, I can't make out what's being said or what we're both giggling at. But to me now, they're like my most treasured things, because I'll have them forever.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have my dad forever. So
yeah, my dad died when I was a child. So I wonder, asking you about having adult conversations with your dad, because I've never had one. For me, like, I'll never see my dad ring me on my phone or, have a text message from him. So I wondered if, like, you wanted to talk about, like, the adult conversations or...
in terms of adult conversations, he was always quite good at giving advice, but like the typical adult conversations, my mum handled all of those. He was just a little bit silly, goofy, a bit immature. That was all my mum's job. But he used to ring me for silly things. Like when he was quite sick, he would say, I've got voicemails saved to my phone. Sweetheart, can you go pick me up a tub of salted caramel ice cream or whatever? That kind of thing. I mean, even though I had him into my adult life, I am very, very glad, because he obviously saw me off to uni, and he cried a bit when I left. I think he didn't let on that he knew that he was going to die, but I think he did know. But he saw me off to uni, and he used to pick me up from parties when, you're not supposed to be going out till 12 o'clock. But anyway, but I was actually having a conversation last week about graduation, which I haven't graduated yet. I'll graduate next year. At my uni, you get 3 tickets. I was talking to my mum and I said, why would they give you 3? And she said, well, presumably you'd have one close friend or significant other, and you'd have 2 parents. And I was like, well, what do I do? Because I don't have 2 parents. And she was like, well, you'll have to pick someone else. We were sat at a restaurant and I burst into tears, because it was at that moment that I didn't want anyone else at my graduation. I just wanted my dad and my mum there together. And it's obviously not going to happen. And so now I still have the dilemma of who do I bring to my graduation, and my dad can't be there. So is there any point that I go to graduation in the first place? Which I did say to my mum. She wasn't too impressed. But I will go to my graduation knowing that I graduated as a result of my dad basically saying, you are going to London, you applied to uni, you can go even though I'm sick. But that was a conversation I wish I was having with my dad. Do you want to come to graduation? I'm sure you relate, Grace. There are big milestones that they're going to miss.
Yeah, I think my first proper one was when I passed my driving test, because I knew that if my dad was alive, he'd be taking me out in some old banger trying to teach me how to drive, and I'd be having nervous breakdowns behind the wheel, and finally passing, I could just like see his smile. And I think it really hit me that, like, it's those milestones that you grieve, like, that are coming, like walking down the aisle, and
that's a big one.
Yeah, and having a baby, and like, I think you grieve all the things that you miss, and I think that's like where I'm at now. Is I'm grieving things for the future, and that he's not going to be here for like when I move out and I have my own place, or to meet like my significant other. Or so I think that's what gets me emotional now, is all the things that you like can't see that I'm looking forward to now.
I think that one about significant other is very, very difficult. I mean, I was in a relationship before my dad died, and he obviously met that person, and then after my dad died, we broke up, and now I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend, and we have conversations about it all the time, that he's never met my dad and he never will meet my dad, and it's just a bit of a funny thing, like, because I want him to love my dad as much as I did, and that's not possible because my dad's not here. So you're making a judgment of a person based on the things that you've heard or that I've told you, or the pictures that you've seen or the videos that you've watched, but you're never going to get the chance to meet him. It's also a bit annoying because my dad was the kind of person who would have put you in your place. So he would have been the person to say, you need to look after my daughter, she's my favourite, because I was the favourite. Sorry to my brother and sister, but I was his eldest, his little princess. He would have said, you've got to look after her. I'll be on your back if you're not. And he's not there. And my mum's just not that scary.
Well, my mum does it for the both of them. But yeah, I know what you mean, because my dad would have put them in their place. He was strict. It's like the little things of like asking, like, if you're going to get proposed to, and like they're going to have to ask my mum and not my dad. But yeah, I get where you're coming from completely.
In saying that my mum's not scary, I think if she were to be asked if they could marry me, I still think she'd give them a bit of a hard time.
Is there anything that you do to like remember him?
So obviously now it's been 2 years, my coping mechanisms are more subconscious than, when it first happened, I was actively grieving. Now I think I look at pictures. I've got a teddy bear with his voice in it. It's the same type of teddy bear that I had when I was 6 or 7, and he put an audio message in when he was going away overseas. And now I have a different audio message in a bear that looks the same. That sounds very confusing.
That's really cute.
Yeah, and then we talk about him all the time. I go to the place where we scattered his ashes quite often. What about you?
Yeah, I've got like a few things made out of his clothes. So I have quite a few cushions that are made out of his ties, and my mum got me a quilt made out of all his shirts that she kept. So I have that on my bed. And just like you, really, like I look at photos, and I actually have I actually have a tape of my dad's last voicemail on my nan's phone. And I've got like the dodgiest audio recording of it on my phone, where it's all crackly, where I'm trying to like record it next to the tape. So I listen to that every now and then. But that's only when I want a good cry. That's when I'm like, want a good wail when I'm sat in bed. Every summer, we used to go to like the same place on holiday, because we used to have a place there as a family. So I try and go there once a year and like breathe in the ocean air and like feel really close to him. And it makes me think of like all the summers of him embarrassing me and like budgie smuggler speedos and ice creams, and trying to get him in the pool, and he wouldn't come swimming because he was trying to get a tan. So yeah, but on like anniversaries and stuff, we have a curry. That's the best way to remember him, I think, is with a good old chicken sag with extra garlic. Was his favourite.
In terms of coping mechanisms, crying is actually an excellent one.
Yeah, I'm such a crier.
I'll put it in my diary as well. An hour to cry, sob your little heart out. When you're crying and you're sniffing so much that it sounds like you're hyperventilating. I think if I've really worked myself up, or I've had a very high emotional day, I'll just take myself off to be alone.
I think for me, I'm a crier as well. Like, I very much like to get it out. I'm a lay in bed and kind of wail, and then once I've done that, I'll get up and have a hug, and then I'm like, okay, I'm okay. My dad taught me how to bake and how to cook, so I quite like making a cake or like kneading bread, and I'll be like proper like going for it, so to get all the tension out. But I think music's a big one. Like, I love just whacking on a sad playlist and I'll just have a little cry and then be all right.
I love a sad movie as well.
Yeah.
What's your favourite sad movie?
It's either The Fault in Our Stars, that's a good cryy one, or My Sister's Keeper. I have a good cry to that as well.
Ooh, that's a heartbreaker. Mine is probably Me Before You.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lovely, joyful movie until about the end.
Spoiler alert. I like a good read as well, like to escape. I love just being able to sit there and read and to be like, okay, I'm going to take myself out of it for, I don't know, an hour or so and like read a good few chapters to escape what's going on around me.
I used to be an avid reader and now I don't really read at all, apart from corporate contracts and stuff at work, which is also tear-jerking. But...
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Grace, for talking to me. I've really enjoyed our time on this podcast. Thank you for sharing about your favourite memories of your dad, and very interesting to know that there are other people out there who have been through similar experiences to me. I mean, it doesn't really get more similar than your dad's both dying of the same thing, which we both found out today about each other.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it as well. Thank you for sharing. It's nice to see that we still have our similarities and differences in the similar situations. So thanks for a lovely chat.
Grief in Common is a podcast run by the Winston's Wish Youth team. The topics of conversation aim to provide comfort and make a difference to other young grieving people over the age of 13.
We hope to give listeners the confidence to talk about their own grief journey.
It's rare to be able to listen to other young people being open and honest about their grief and how they're feeling.
We hope this podcast reaches young grieving people everywhere and helps them to feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common.
Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you.